Okay, great. Welcome everybody to today's Cabinet this afternoon. Thank you for attending this meeting of Cabinet. Whilst this meeting is open to the public, it is being recorded and broadcast live on the County Council's website and will be available for repeat viewing. It may also be recorded and filmed by the press and public. Filming or recording is only permitted in this room whilst the meeting is taking place, so must stop when the meeting is either adjourned or closed. Filming is not permitted elsewhere in the building at any time. We're not expecting a fire drill, but in the event there is a fire alarm, please vacate via the main reception or via one of the emergency exits across the hall. Thank you. Okay, so we go straight to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Jo.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Ros Chad.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Councillor Chad, I will say, is a little bit poorly today. That's why she's not attending with us today. Okay, so declarations of interest. Any Cabinet member with a disclosable pecuniary interest or a personal interest in any item on the agenda should please declare that either now or at the time of the item by first indicating that they wish to speak. Also today we have an additional one in terms of the council tax setting dispensation. So I'd like to take this opportunity to remind members of a general dispensation granted by the Conduct Advisory Panel relating to the revenue budget and precept item. This dispensation enables members with a beneficial interest in land within the administrative area of the County Council to participate and vote in the County Council business relating to the setting of council tax or precepts. It is therefore taken as read all Cabinet members have declared an interest in item 7 on the agenda. I hope that's clear to everybody. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to declare a non-prejudicial interest in item 10, the local transport plan 4. My business is EV charging and it's referenced in there. So, as I say, non-prejudicial.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm sure that has been noted. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll now go on to agenda item 3, confirmation of minutes. Just looking around the room, are we all happy to accept the minutes as set out? Agree. Okay, that's great. Thank you. We will take those as recorded as approved then. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now go on to Chairman's announcements. And I have a few announcements. I want to start this afternoon by the news we had yesterday of the King. And I would just like to say, by wishing His Majesty the King a full and swift recovery following his recent cancer diagnosis. Our thoughts clearly and very best wishes are with His Majesty the King Charles and the royal family at this time. I'm sure we would all agree and support that and wish him, as I say, all the very best. Okay, I also welcome the recent announcement that the government has topped up the local government finance settlement with additional £600 million, of which £500 million will go to councils delivering social care services. We found out yesterday that, as expected, our share is just over £10 million. I would like to thank our local MPs for their efforts in lobbying the government and for highlighting the immense financial pressures that all councils are under due to inflation and the growth in demand for our services, and that's the services right across the authority. Whilst the funding will help to shore up our finances as we head towards 2025-26, the more important point is that government have recognised the pressure we are under. I hope this will now act as a trigger for the need to fundamentally change the way in which local government is funded, something that I've been calling for since I became leader. Without a long-term Okay, we're all back on. Thanks very much. I'll go back just a little bit. So whilst the funding will help to shore up our finances as we head towards 25-26, the more important point is that the government has recognised the pressure we are under. I hope this will now act as a trigger for the need to fundamentally change the way in which local government is funded, something that I've been calling for since I became leader. Without a long-term national funding solution, local authorities like Hampshire will have to make tough decisions around how we continue to deliver critical services for children and adults in most need of our support, whilst meeting our legal obligation to deliver a balanced budget every year. That is why we have launched a public consultation last month inviting residents' views on the future of some local services. The consultation sets out proposals that could help lower costs in 13 service areas in future, and what it might mean for the County Council were to deliver these services differently to help address the forecasts of 132 million shortfall in our budget from the financial year 25 to 2026. The consultation closes on the 31st of March, and I strongly encourage all Hampshire residents to take part in this important consultation, especially people living in the District Council areas of Rushmore, Havant, Gosport and Basingstoke-on-Deane, where we are keen to hear from more residents. I want to talk a little bit now about the work that has been done within the authority and nationally on smoking and vaping. Hampshire County Council welcomes the government's announcement to protect the health of children and young people through a ban on disposable vapes and a restriction on vape flavours and marketing. The Council's stance on vaping is clear. If you don't smoke, don't vape. If you smoke, vaping can be a useful tool to help you quit, but it isn't risk-free. Under the leadership of our Director of Public Health, we continue to lead the work for a smoke-free generation through our multi-agency Tobacco Control Alliance. This includes working with schools, parents and carers to prevent smoking and vaping in children and our young people, and supporting people to quit through our Commission Stop Smoking service. The County Council has really been on the front foot in our response to the concerning issue of youth vaping. Much of that is down to our excellent public health, education and trading standards teams, but I also wanted to thank 4 Cabinet members for the work that they've done closely for working with officers to ensure Hampshire is amongst the leading authorities in the country in tackling smoking and underage vaping. Recently thinking about the weather we've had and the storms we've had. So January saw 3 named storms and a cold snap to strike the UK. In Hampshire, Storm Henk caused particularly significant disruption with heavy rainfall and wind gusts in excess of 60 miles per hour. Between the 2nd and the 9th of January, the County Council's highways teams received a staggering 4,166 inquiries on the efforts of Storm Henk, raised 164 emergency jobs relating to fallen trees, and closed more than 100 roads due to flooding and trees. So at this point, I'd just like to mention the new Our Hants app that we now use. And residents can report flooding and other local issues through the County Council's new mobile app called Our Hants. That app can be downloaded free of charge from your phone's app store, and it really is a very useful thing that is now out there, and I encourage as many people as possible to use that app where they can. I would like to say a big thank you to our highways workers and indeed all our frontline teams who worked around the clock in very challenging and changeable weather conditions throughout January to support vulnerable residents and keep our road users safe. And sticking with the highways teams, I want to report an incident that one of our Gritters drivers unfortunately had to go through. So, however, on a sadly negative note, I was appalled to learn of a dreadful incident involving one of our Gritter drivers who was out sorting roads in the Borden area in the early hours of Monday on the 15th of January. While out on a sort run on the A325 going through Buxhorn Oak, the window of his vehicle was shot and shattered by a large ball bearing. The shot came, we believe, from a passing vehicle. Thankfully, our driver was unharmed because of his quick reactions, but I urge anyone who witnessed the incident or might have information about it to contact Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary. Councillor Nick Adams-King, I don't know if you did want to add anything to that. I mean, it was quite an appalling incident and you might have a bit more detail. Thank you.
Not really, Leader, other than to say that obviously these guys are out there and doing their best for us in really terrible conditions, and to have this happen to the driver involved was, really unacceptable. And all credit to him for going back and getting a different gritter and getting straight back out on the road. And that shows the dedication of the kind of staff that we have. And so my gratitude to him and to all of the team that look after the roads in those conditions as well.
Nick, thank you very much for that, and absolutely, if you can pass that on as well, to actually come back, go through that and go straight back ahead again, as you say, shows the dedication of the teams for doing that. So thank you very much for that. Also had a few visits with Councillor Chad, and one of them was to the New Forest for Ukraine. And I was delighted to have the opportunity to meet the volunteers at the New Forest for Ukraine a few weeks ago, alongside, as I say, the Deputy Leader and the Hampshire's member champion for Homes for Ukraine scheme, Councillor Rod Cooper. The three of us were very impressed with the dedication and passion of the volunteers, who are all doing a brilliant job managing public donation points across the New Forest and sending aid to charitable foundations in Ukraine. Nearly 2 years on from the onset of the conflict, I would like to thank Hampshire residents for continuing to show exemplary compassion and generosity towards the people of Ukraine. Whether that involves donating and sending aid to refugees in Ukraine, or supporting an individual or family from Ukraine to resettle in our county. There's also this week the National Apprenticeships Week, which celebrates the outstanding benefits and opportunities that apprenticeships bring to learners and employers alike. The Hampshire Achieves, it is a perfect time for me to congratulate officers in the County Council's Hampshire Achieves service, which has received an Ofsted rating of good overall and in aspects of its service. The Ofsted inspector spoke very highly of Hampshire Achieves apprenticeship offer, which directly supports the Council's apprenticeship levy programme and focuses on recruitment and workforce development and a range of key public services. At the time of the inspection, 124 County Council employees were enrolled on apprenticeships within Hampshire Achieves, working towards level 3 and level 4 qualifications in key roles such as teaching assistants and adult care workers, and congratulate to them and the excellent work that they do. Had a few business visits and to Winchester University, and as you know, my ambition as leader is to enhance Hampshire's status as a great place, I've got to do it, to live, learn, work, play and visit. And I think I got them all in this time, if anybody's checking. Regarding the learn and work elements, one of the key areas of focus for the Deputy Leader and myself is to actively support and encourage collaboration between skill providers and employers. This includes championing the benefits that apprenticeships bring to learners and businesses. Councillor Chad and I recently visited 2 Hampshire Business Awards finalists, Evolve Dynamics and Fortis, to discuss apprenticeships, training and other drivers of business growth. I also spoke at the Future World of Work conference hosted by Winchester University last month. My speech emphasised the importance of joining the dots between businesses, education and local government, so that together we develop a shared understanding of Hampshire's current and future skills needs and unlock a wide range of employment and skills opportunities, including apprenticeships. I think the key bit there for me is the joining up the dots and bringing everybody working together to achieve that. So apprenticeships are a crucial and rewarding pathway to early career development training, retraining and business growth. And I'm delighted that the National Apprenticeship Week gives us the chance to promote and celebrate them. So that's the end of my chairman's announcements. So we will now move directly on to, I don't believe we have any deputations. Number 5, no, okay, thanks Joe. So there are no deputations. So we will move straight on to agenda item 6, driving towards economic strength. And I think, Gary, you're introducing the paper, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, Cabinet. So I'll keep this one relatively short. It's our usual standing agenda item on driving towards economic strength. So, colleagues, you'll see the usual standing report on the Hampshire economy and the continued long-term focus on the importance of a thriving and prosperous economy for residents and communities across our county. Alongside the latest economic data, which you'll see in Annex 1, the report also makes reference to the significant progress on establishing the transfer of the local enterprise partnership, the LEP functions, assets and accountabilities, which will transfer into upper tier authority control from the 1st of April later this year, including some of the highlights which were demonstrated forming the shadow governance, which has now been well established for our county area. So nothing further from me, Leader, in terms of the report. It speaks for itself. Beyond drawing attention to recommendations in paragraphs 2 to 5 and welcoming any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Oppenheimer.
Thank you, Chairman. Gary, thanks very much for the paper. It's great to see in paragraph 54 that there's a long bullet list there and shows the potential scope of the new Economic Growth Board. Obviously, we need to get the thing up and running first, but I'd be interested if you could expand a bit on the wider strategic opportunities that this board could present in the absence of a county deal anytime soon.
Thank you, Councillor Oppenheimer. It's a really, really good and pertinent question. I mean, we've spoken in this paper for a number of cycles around the ambition around county deals and devolution and what's the prize that would be afforded to our wider economic area. So absolutely agree that this is an opportunity for us in terms of some of those wider place-based opportunities that we articulated in our devolution proposals, which are themes that are generally aligned to economic development. So things like skills, climate change, transport, infrastructure, the list kind of goes on and on. And there's obviously a huge opportunity to bring all that together under single place-based coherent governance, which was obviously an aim of our devolution prospectus, but would be equally applicable to opportunities that you've identified. Equally, what I do recognise is the importance of getting it up and running. And so the focus over the next 6 to 12 months will be around discharging our responsibilities that have been afforded to us alongside the money that comes down. But as you've suggested, huge opportunities to use this as a foundation to springboard from.
Thanks very much for that answer, Gary. And yeah, it is an exciting opportunity. Obviously, one has to restrain one's excitement until the thing's up and running. But I think the challenge for this Economic Growth Board is to retain Hampshire's competitiveness. We now live in a world where 2/3 of English regions have a devolution deal. We don't yet, but I think we can keep our competitiveness if this thing works and really uses all the opportunities available to it.
I think, Gary, you would agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just checking like that. Just a little bit. Any further questions from any members? No. Okay, so I do have one, Gary, but just before that, I just want to comment on terms of the paper. And I always say this at these meetings, it's very difficult when we present papers like this. The great deal, like all the papers on the agenda, the amount of work that has gone into these, preparing these, and the various meetings that we have, and the scrutiny committees that they go through as well to get to this point. So I want to thank you and the team for that, and that goes for all the papers, as I say. But one thing, as you know, that I've been interested in is in terms of the sort of the cross-regional working, and I'm trying to understand how the sort of that wider collaboration would benefit us. And we work with our partners in Surrey and West Sussex and Dorset and our Unitary neighbours as well. It's just understanding that approach that we take and the benefit to Hampshire for doing that.
Thank you, Leader. And it's a helpful bring back to the cabinet reports that we or you agreed in terms of recommendations back in October, where we stated that unequivocal commitment to working in partnership and collaboratively with all neighbouring authorities where it's in our mutual interest to do so, and that commitment has been retained throughout setting up our new arrangements and will be continued well into the future. So that commitment's absolutely there, and you'll see it in the papers. What I thought might be helpful is if I just draw out a couple of practical examples around what that could look like for residents and communities in Hampshire. So I think one of the first areas is how do we take advantage of some of those well-established sectors and clusters that exist around our region that, as Councillor Oppenheimer has said, are not just sort of leading from a UK perspective, but also on an international basis as well. So really putting those Hampshire sectors and clusters on a map. That can be examples such as Jet Zero, maritime, marine, tourism, the rural economy. So the list goes on and on, but there's a real imperative to work with our neighbouring authorities to make those local clusters and sectors as effective as possible. The other dimension to this is then how do we join up as a wider economic region in terms of our role both at a regional level, a national level and international level, and that importance of the Hampshire region in terms of UK PLC and the economic growth and productivity that will come out of our region, which will continue to drive the economic recovery that the country absolutely needs over the next 5 to 10 years. So when you get that sense of scale, Hampshire on its own, 1.4 million residents, 40 to 50 billion pound economy, you incorporate our unitary authorities on the south coast into that, you're up to 2 million. And then if you then incorporate that wider M3 corridor all the way down from the south coast up towards London, incorporating Surrey, you've got the single biggest economic region in the UK out of London. And so there's that huge opportunity to join up and collaborate with our partners, whether that's around infrastructure, whether that's around lobbying central government, but really take advantage of that for the benefit of Hampshire residents and businesses.
Thanks, Gary. And also in terms of, I mean, obviously from April, the first things will change for us all. And I think, as Russell sort of said, actually, we need to understand what that is. And actually, it's quite exciting. But just that little bit more around the governance of that, how that works. So where we're situated, and I know working with our partners as well, but what the governance means locally for Hampshire.
No problem, Leader. So the governance will essentially sit at 3 tiers. So what we've got well established and Cabinet will be absolutely aware is local place-based regeneration boards. And it's recognising that a local level, whether that's a district council level or a town level, that local dimension is absolutely recognised and can feed into the whole. So we've got locally led place-based partnerships. They're things that the county council is not leading or driving, but is absolutely a constituent member and part of and playing our role really effectively. We've then got the governance in the middle that is required of us by central government, which is the Economic Growth Board, which you, Leader, will chair that growth board. And that is the coming together of the economic narrative, the programmes, the future strategies for Hampshire as a whole, as a single accountable upper tier area. It's business led, so there'll be representatives from the business community, both in terms of the bodies and small, medium and large businesses, as well as our skills providers and Solent Freeport as well. And then what we've recognised as well is alongside that, in terms of the democratic engagement, we're maintaining principles of a joint leaders board. So making sure we're respecting and really getting the value of all of our district council leaders at the table and feeding into that governance. And then at the absolute top level, what we then recognise is the importance of that pan-regional governance that I've just referred to. So how do we work with and alongside our neighbouring partners, either on individual thematic basis, where it's in mutual interest to do so, or around major projects and programmes that are of interest to us all. Sometimes that might be with Surrey, for example, on its own. Sometimes that might be with our cities, for example, on their own. But equally, that might be Surrey, Hampshire, and our cities and unitary councils all coming together for the much bigger regional collaboration. So it will work on those 3 levels, Leader.
Thank you, Karen. I think the bit, I suppose, that is really important, is all important in terms of bringing our businesses and the skills providers together, and with our District of Borough colleagues and, like you say, unitaries and other colleagues further afield as well. So I think it's an excellent piece of work, and I'll refer back to what Councillor Oppenheimer said about it's actually an opportunity and quite exciting at the moment to be doing this. And I think we're very well placed because of the work that has been done prior to this getting to this point. So thank you for that. Any further questions from any other members? If not, we will go to the recommendations as set out on page 13. We're all happy to agree the recommendations? Okay, agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, we will now go on to agenda item 7, which is the revenue budget and precept. And I think, Rob, you're presenting. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Leader, and good afternoon, members. So obviously the budget for 24-25 is the interim year of our 2-year cycle. So we would normally be expecting to draw from reserves to balance that budget. At 84.7 million, this is by far the largest gap we have ever faced. And that's obviously because we've got a carry forward of £51 million from the current financial year, which we didn't expect to have. And that is after a 4.99% proposed council tax. You'll see in the report that our budget monitoring for this year, we see significant pressure across the services that we've been reporting across the year. And many of those are feeding into requests for additional funding, which are set out in section G. The overall budget is outlined in paragraph 98, which just shows the constituent elements of the sort of final figures that we've done for this report. So that was before we got the announcement of the 600 million that the leader mentioned. So it has been agreed, has been approved that we've got £9.9 million additional for social care grant, but we also benefit from a few of the other elements that were contained within that total 600 million. So we expect to get just over £10 million that will go towards the bottom line. We're just getting the final figures from districts on collection fund surpluses for council tax and business rates, and those are showing a small improvement compared to the figures that we've got in the report. So as we normally do, we will wrap all of that up for you in an amendment that will come to County Council. But obviously we expect the overall draw from balances to be below 75 million as a result of that, which is still a significant figure. Finally, just draw your attention to Appendix 6, which is the Section 25 report from me as your Chief Financial Officer. I think the conclusion of that report is that we are still in a strong position for setting the budget for 24-25, but clearly unless we can address the underlying deficit in our revenue budget, then we will have significant issues going forward, which is something that we've been saying since 2018. That needs to be addressed by government. So that's all I was going to say, Leader, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Rob. And as I said to Gary earlier, appreciate clearly the amount of time and effort and work that goes in, especially recently with all the finance papers as well. Any questions from members? Liz. Councillor Fairhurst, sorry.
Thank you. I'm not terribly sure I should be asking you this question because I don't know if you're the right person to answer it. But there's lots of pressures across the children's services at the moment. Could we not have predicted these in advance and sort of built them into the programme earlier?
Yes, I think it's a fair point. For a number of the pressures, what we tend to do is look throughout the year to see if is it a blip or is it an ongoing trend that we need to build in. School transport, which is by far our biggest relative pressure at the moment, is probably the most difficult to predict because there are so many variables. Trying to get any sensible forecasting on that is very difficult. Some of the other areas in children's services, though, you'll see that I've mentioned that we're trying to move to a formulaic approach. So as caseloads increase, we should have a pretty good idea of, therefore, how resources need to change as a result of that. So that's true in terms of the independent reviewing officers, but also the administration of special educational needs and educational psychologists. So going forward, on the basis that we predict the additional numbers of EHCPs, etc., then we should be able to build that in, as part of the budget process.
Liz, thank you. That's a really good question. And understanding just the technical issues behind how difficult it is to do that prediction, and that covers other areas of the authority as well, I believe. Councillor Nick Adams-King.
I was going to pick up on that issue as well, Leader. Rob, the Section 25 report talks about how robust our financial planning is, and how our reserves still remain around the level at which we would hope them to be. How confident can we be going forward of what that picture looks like, and how realistic is it the further away we go from this year?
Yeah, it's a good point. So the Section 25 report specifically asked me to give a view on the robustness of the estimates and the adequacy of reserves. So in that context, and I think the additional funding that we're adding in as part of this process, I am confident that we are very robust in terms of the way we put together our budgets. So we don't, we will allow for all of the pressures that we face, all of the growth and inflation, even if that creates a problem for us. So from that point of view, I'm very happy with the robustness of the estimates. And then the adequacy of reserves. So at the moment, we are in the position that we're able to cover off both 23-24 and 24-25. So that doesn't represent a risk for us. But clearly going forward, unless that underlying position is addressed, then inevitably we will run out of reserves.
Okay, Rob, thank you for the questions. Councillor Warwick, Jan.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Rob, for this paper. Both you and the Leader referred to the government grants that were announced last month, the 600 million that's boiled down to just under 10 million for us against the adult social care grant. Is that recurring money? And I know that's piqued an interest in local government finances generally in the media. Do you anticipate there may be more announcements along that line in the near future, or are we looking at reform of local government? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the overall numbers for us, as I say, what it's done is to reduce an £85 million draw from reserves down to a £75 million draw from reserves. So whilst it's welcome, it doesn't fundamentally change the position that we're in. I think, as the Leader mentioned, I think probably the key point is the fact that the government have recognised that there is that pressure in the system, and therefore I would hope that we could now go on and fundamentally, address the local government finance system. And I think in terms of letters that we've received from government, it does give a commitment to do that. So I think that's potentially the prize for us, that this will lead to further reform.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jan. Any further questions from anyone? Okay. Rob, it's just to say, and also just for members, just making sure reading all the recommendations there, be very clear what we are recommending to council in terms of obviously the council tax and the setting there, so we're all very clear of that. But it is to say, Rob, again, so thank you for all the work you've done on this, and I think your answer to Councillor Warwick in terms of the 600 million and the 10 million to us, being very clear about clearly everything, helps to a degree. But I think, as I say, Rob has said, the most important thing is that recognition about what it is that there is an issue. And as I said in my opening remarks, we've been saying for a very long time, there needs to be a fundamental review of how local authorities are funding. So there is that long-term sustainable solution to that. And I think that the letters that a lot of our MPs signed through the County Council's network in helping to achieve that extra funding did go some way to doing that and getting that recognition. So I think it's progress, but we've clearly still got a long way to go. I think we would all agree. So Rob, thank you. If there aren't any further questions, I will go to the recommendations. Okay, so recommendations as set out on page 33 and 35, noting those recommendations that will go to Cabinet to council on council tax. We're all happy to accept those. Agreed. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rob. Okay, so we will now go on to agenda item 8, which is the capital programme, and over to you again, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. So a very short introduction to this one. So this is the annual report that we bring to you in terms of the update of the capital programme. So very similar to previous years. And the recommendations mainly relate to some additional funding that we're seeking for specific schemes. So happy to answer any questions, Leader.
finger working. Right, okay. Okay, thanks, Rob. Sorry about that. It's a technical issue on my behalf there. So if you have any questions, Councillor North, Kirsty, sorry.
It's okay. Thank you, Leader. I'll kick you harder next time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this, Rob. Would you agree that our capital programme seems to be on a more stable footing than the revenue budget?
I think the short answer is, well, actually, the answer is yes and no. So I think from a capital perspective, it is probably easier to prioritise the scarce resources that we've got to the things that need it the most. I think the difference compared to the revenue budget is, of course, we have commitments that we have to meet under statute, irrespective of the funding that we have available. So I think it may look more stable, but I think when you look at some of the gaps that we've got in terms of highway maintenance or property maintenance, there are still issues there that we need to fund, and we don't have the funding for them. I think they're probably just not as obvious as the revenue funding, where we have no choice but to provide the services if somebody meets the need.
You have any further? Okay. Councillor Heron, Edward.
Thank you. Rob, a couple of questions in a few parts. I've read and I've had raised by residents with me that the government have increased the flexibility in the use of capital receipts towards supporting revenue funding. The first part is that correct? And then, if so, the second part is, we have always resisted spending one-off money on ongoing revenue support. It doesn't make any sense to take, some money that's once and then put in something that's going to happen again and again. But given where we are and the sort of direction of travel of sort of upper tier responsibility authorities, is that something you think we should look at again? Just based on the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
So the government is currently consulting on various different flexibilities for using capital receipts for revenue purposes. I guess in answer to your question, from my point of view, using reserves to balance the budget in a personal sense is like using your savings up. So you're spending more than you earn, so you're using your savings up to keep that going. Capital receipts flexibility is like saying, I'm going to sell my car in order to continue to spend more than my income is. So I think from my point of view, I would say it is a last resort. And when you look at some of the authorities that are looking to use those capital receipt flexibilities, it's because they've run out of reserves, they're unable to make savings, and therefore they're having to sell capital assets and use that to plug the revenue gap. I mean, I do think that is, literally last resort in terms of funding your revenue budget. So as far as we are able to avoid it, then I would like to do so.
Thanks, Rob. Any further questions from any members? No, it's interesting, isn't it, in that question in terms of what actually flexibility means and what it actually turns into in terms of how you achieve that, and actually what that can mean long term. I think, Rob, that's the bit that is worrying, and I think that was sort of what sat behind the question, really. So I think we all need to be aware of that and what that actually means. You want to come back, Councillor Aaron? Yeah.
Chairman, I do, and if you give me a comment, because I think I'm absolutely right. It's last resort, and if you look today at some of the assets that the council are selling and what we're achieving for them, and I'm thinking of some of our development sites, had we sold those off for not inconsiderable sums in the past, the loss of what we would have achieved through that short-term view, both for the council and indeed for some of these, for the wider benefits that we're bringing in because they're being developed by us as a responsible party, it is effectively selling the silver to feed today. The problem is, if you haven't got any food, what other choice do you have but to sell the family silver, even if the price of silver is very low?
Very clearly put, Councillor Heron. Thank you. I understand that. Yeah, but you make a really valid point, and it's really good to sort of express it in that way. So thank you for that. Just looking at other members, if there are any further questions or comments. No. So Rob, again, thank you. We will move on to the recommendations as set out on page 143 and 144. All happy to accept the recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Rob. Okay, we will now move on to agenda item 9, school streets. And I think that's Gary and Frank are presenting. Gentlemen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, Cabinet. I'd like to introduce my colleague Frank Baxter, Head of Integrated Transport. I'm going to introduce the report, Leader, but Frank's here to help me out with any tricky questions if they arise. So members will see a fairly self-evident report which updates on the school's streets programme following previous reports to Cabinet in 2021 and 2022 and the establishment of 3 trials referred to in the report. The report recommends that following the pilots, the Council would fully support future individual schemes on the condition that the costs of commissioning and decommissioning are fully covered by external parties, managed locally by the school, and the qualification criteria, which are helpfully appended to the report, are met in their entirety. So recommendations, Leader, are in paragraphs 2 to 3 of the report, and we'd welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Forster, Steve.
Thank you. That's a short, succinct summary, but the report was very detailed, so appreciated. And these schemes, I think, could be well received in the right areas, particularly roads that aren't through roads. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, if any school does want to proceed with them, how do they register an interest? The second one is, how do we actually ensure that they meet that criteria on funding, both in the setup costs and in long-term operation? Because I understand that it's not only funding to put them in or take it out if appropriate, but also to run it, making sure they've got the resource to run it, because the school would be providing that. You mentioned third-party funding or third-party support, so that I assume the districts can fund it. But I wondered if you could just highlight, what is the approximate cost of setting up one of these schemes?
Thank you. In answer to the question, it kind of depends on whether you agree with the recommendations, and if you do, then we will amend our website to include guidance to schools on how to apply. It'll include a self-service guide where schools could actually check whether they're compliant with the criteria. If they are and they still wish to proceed, then to make contact with an officer at Hampshire County Council to look into the potential for taking it to the next step, which would be a more hand-holding approach through the process to show them the challenges they're going to face and see if they still want to do it. And then if everything goes right and they're prepared to pay the sums required to set the thing up, but also to dismantle the scheme should volunteers, which can be quite ephemeral in these cases, decide that they don't wish to volunteer anymore. The total cost of both setting up on average has been about between £15,000 to £18,000, and the cost of dismantling a scheme, which involves traffic regulation orders, etc., which require publication, is roughly around £10,000. So per school interested, it's about £25,000 in Hampshire costs. The schools themselves would incur costs if they need staff to actually run those facilities as well. If a school can get third-party funding, all the better.
Okay, thanks, Frank and Gary. I think it's interesting, isn't it, when we looked at the 3 examples, how it is really horses for courses. It's going to suit some and not all. There isn't a one-size-fits-all here, and it is very much dependent, as you quite rightly said, Frank, in terms of the schools themselves and the commitment, and with the volunteers as well. But it's interesting to note, subject to us agreeing them, how you could apply if you want to do that. So I think we're very clear about that. If you still want to have a look at this, you clearly will be able to. But I think it's very important that we make it very clear where all the responsibilities and sort of not necessarily liabilities, but the costs that do go with that in terms of the support you need with the volunteers as well. So I think we need to be very clear about that. So thank you for that. Any further questions from members? No? Okay. So we will go to the recommendations then as set out on page 179. Happy to agree those? Okay, thank you. And also now we can look forward to that being on the website then, Frank, as we have approved that then. So thank you for that and appreciate that. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, if we're happy, we will go forward then on to agenda item 10, adoption of the local plan. And I think, gentlemen, it's over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Forster will be pleased. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one, introducing Local Transport Plan 4, which is a pivotal future strategy for our area. So the plan you'll see set out both in the covering report, but then is fully appended as Appendix A to the report. And as I mentioned, it's a really, really key and important policy document for the County Council moving forward. Primarily developed through our strategic transport team under Frank's leadership, but very much a team game with lots of cross-cutting engagement, both across our organisation as a whole, but also with our partners as well, which is pulled out in the report. Colleagues and councillors will be aware this is a necessary statutory requirement to have a local transport plan, and one that we are required to do so under the Transport Act. But also a significant opportunity to shape our transport infrastructure for the future based on what you'll see is the adoption of the principles and the policies as set out within the plan. You'll also see that golden thread within our report around linking the Hampshire 2050 vision and recognising the role that transport policy plays and infrastructure in delivering that wider ambition, whether it's around economic prosperity and growth, safe, inclusive and sustainable communities, tackling climate change, respecting and protecting the environment, and enabling our residents to live active and healthy lives. Members will also see in the report the extensive public consultation and engagement that we've undertaken since 2021, and the subsequent oversight by Select Committee as well, and all of that work that's gone into getting the document as it stands today. So Cabinet, I'd like to refer you to recommendations in paragraphs 2 to 7 of the report, and welcome any questions.
Okay, thanks, Gary. And I'm just interested to know before I go to members that, I mean, the amount of work there again that's gone into this and the consultation process and all the work that sits behind there as well. And Frank, you know, being previously involved with this and understand the process that we've gone through to get to this. So there again, thanks to you and your team. Go to members for questions. Councillor Warwick.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Frank and Gary. I know this is a long anticipated report, and I was really pleased to see the detail in it, and also that you're starting to refer to this policy in some significant planning applications as they come forward. But as we all know, money is tight, both at local level and at national level. How will we pay for some of the projects and schemes and aspirations that are outlined in this strategy? Thank you.
Thank you. In answer to that, this is a policy document in the main. So it's setting the policy and the strategy, not the kind of financial framework within which it comes forward. But the quality of it, and I would say it's a very good quality LTP because I wrote it, is really important because that's the... Yeah, but thanks very much. The quality of it will be assessed by government, and that will influence the level of funding that we're able to access in the future. And government, in guidance that we've seen in recent years, has suggested that LTPs will be incentivised based on the quality of the plans that they produce. So by having a good plan, we're hopeful that we'll be able to access a good portion of the funding that is available nationally and fight the fight for Hampshire.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I think the important thing is Eb is saying about actually having a good plan, which gives it the evidence and the weight that it carries because of that about attracting the funding. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Frank, for that very high quality LTP plan report. I just got one brief question, which is that there's a lot of work being done in districts, many of whom already have their LC WIPs, their local cycling, walking and infrastructure plan. And a number like my own, Hart, is actually going through consultation at the moment. How do they tie in properly with the LTP4?
Okay, so the LTP being the policy front, if you like, and the strategy, then is supported by lots of supporting documents, of which every LC whip that currently is being developed or has been agreed within Hampshire forms a part. Each of those will produce an action plan, and within that action plan there will be a prioritisation process which will pull out the cycle and active travel schemes that rise to the top in terms of being the most effective, best bang for buck. They will then go into a process of prioritisation against all schemes that we consider, whether it's bus schemes, road schemes, etc. And those that kind of get the best strategic case generally find their way into the feasibility programme, and then from there on into the capital programme, should those schemes be found to be feasible.
A brief follow-up, if I may. Just so, would I be right in assuming that much of the work as a follow-up will need to be done by the districts, particularly in terms of their local plans and their developer contributions, to make sure that some of these actually do come through?
Yes, so the prioritisation criteria we will use will include things like, is there money available from the districts, from developments, etc., to make these things happen? And clearly, if there is money to deliver, those things will be prioritised and rise to the top.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor Heron?
Chairman, thank you. First of all, can I just say how much I welcome this from when I had this brief, and I think I took it on from you, Leader, from when you have the work that has gone into this and actually the quality of the document that's come out. I think you really have to commend all those involved for. Thank you. Chairman, the problem with a transport policy is pretty much everything in some way interacts with transport, how we live, how we move our goods, how we do. Therefore, when you have a policy document, you can pretty much put the world in it. So I recognise that at a level it's a challenge as to where you go. So having said that, here's something, have you thought about whether it should be in it, and is it? That you'll be aware that the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act changed the requirements between other public bodies and national parks, and whereas before we had to have a regard to their purposes, we now have a requirement to further, and indeed a statutory requirement to work and seek to deliver the objectives in their partnership plan. Have we considered that in this? And particularly I think it's let's have a quick look. On figure 5B, I think it is. Yeah, without my guys, have we looked at whether we ought to just have some reference to make sure that we're showing that we've recognised that legislative change?
Thanks. I think it's a really good point. We write these things at a point in time and things evolve around us. And I think this is one of those cases. The intention of the LTP was always to support national parks in as much as we possibly can in terms of the infrastructure and the strategies we develop. So I would suggest that recommendation 5, which actually allows for additional text to be added to the document in consultation with the director, is actually applied in this case, and we develop something up that can go in to enhance it.
Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So, any further questions? I'll check first. Russell, Councillor Oppenheimer.
Thank you. I wanted to make a brief observation, which is that I'm really pleased that with this new plan, we're delivering on 2 recommendations put to us by the Director of Public Health. So, members, you'll all remember that the Director of Public Health had a 2018 report called Shaping Place. And then there was the 2020 report on tackling obesity. And what I'm really pleased about is with this new local transport plan, we're actually taking on board what he said about keeping Hampshire healthy. And, this is not the end of the process. This is an important step, though. But it has to lead to that reallocation of road space and that encouragement to make it safer for people to walk and cycle on their way to the shops, on their way to school. But I'm pretty confident that that sea change is going to happen.
Thanks very much, Russell. Important point there. Any further questions? If not, I just want to check with David in terms of that additional recommendation. So that is covered in that recommendation 5, is it? We're able to do that there, David?
I think it gives delegated authority to the director to make the changes. So, yes.
Oh, I just wanted to check, Frank, as you were so confident it was an excellent report, that we do all agree with you that it is an excellent report. So you'll be pleased to hear. So thank you very much for that, both of you, and particularly Frank for answering those questions. If there aren't any further questions, I think I've checked that. Okay, we will then go to recommendations, subject to that point being made about recommendation 5 and those additional points that was referred to. So we will go to the recommendations as set out on page 189. We're all agreed with those. That's great. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Okay, we will now go on to agenda item 11, constitutional update, standing orders and protocol for member officers' relations. David, over to you. Thank you, yeah.
Thank you, Leader. There's two elements to the report. The first relates to standing orders. What I think is just an eminently sensible change to standing orders to enable the chairman of the county council, when it's standing as the full council, or chairman of committees, to make reasonable adjustments to take account of disabilities. So, for example, our standing orders require people to stand. Sometimes they require people to speak, to put their hands up, etc. So, this just gives flexibility to the chairman to make appropriate arrangements. The second is an update to the protocol for member officer relations. It always dealt with at a very high level how members should contact. A member contact protocol was developed, which was on the members portal, had a bit more detail. So we felt that it was appropriate for that to be incorporated into the protocol for member officer relations. And there's one other slight element to it which wasn't in that member contact protocol, which is around some guidance for members and officers when members are visiting county council workplaces. So just to emphasise, it's not intended in any way to prevent members speaking to officers or anything like that. It's just to provide some guidance around the subjects of conversations, and so that officers, particularly junior officers, are not put into difficult or awkward situations.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that and understand that it is set there to help all of us in that process as well. Councillor North, Kirsty.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, David, for this. Are you content that the changes to the standing orders give enough flexibility to the chairman of whichever committee it is to deal with all disabilities?
Yes, thank you. I mean, we did give some thought to, trying to define specific disabilities and put a bit more detail in, but actually we've gone for a very high level approach, which just says an absolute discretion for the chairman to agree that, and to say whatever disability comes up, provided it's, does fall within the definition of disability in the Disability Discrimination Act, and that I can provide some advice on, then the chairman has an incredibly wide discretion to make an appropriate adjustment.
That's really reassuring, thank you. On the member officer protocol, if I can go on, Chairman, sorry. These changes, are they new provisions, or you've set out that this sort of happened in an informal way and we're formalising it? Have you changed that?
No. So the only element that is new is the element that relates to members visiting county council workspaces. So the elements around how members contact the county council is just basically verbatim with a few updates from the member contact protocol. So there's that one small new element, but it's hopefully just a clarification which will be helpful for members and officers.
Thank you. That's really useful to have that confirmed. Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, David, thank you very much for that. Any further questions from members? If not, David, I just want to say thank you. And I think it's one of those papers that can seem small things, but actually has a big impact, and it just helps the process, not only sort of internally with the council for the chairman as well, at full council, but also, as you say, when we are out on site visiting. So in terms of officers and for members as well. So I appreciate that. I think the clarification is useful to all of us. So if there aren't any further questions, I will go to the recommendations as set out on page 351. Are we all happy to accept them as set out? Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, David, as well. Okay, we will now move on to agenda item 12. This is Digital Hampshire Future Strategy, and Emma Noyce is going to present. Welcome, Emma.
Good afternoon, members. Hello. We met just before Christmas and discussed the Superfast Broadband programme. This is the second of two papers, and we deliberately wanted a separation between those two papers because it's important to look at the past before we think about the future. But that pause enables us to think differently about the future because our role going forward will be different, and there's that opportunity to reset our approach. In a nutshell, this paper recognises that a digitally connected Hampshire is crucial to our economic prosperity and the well-being of our residents. But this paper also provides the opportunity to consider that in the context of the financial situation we find ourselves in and our own specific organisational responsibilities. The first section of the paper sets out the background and context, so making that very, very clear link with the Hampshire 2050 vision, but also links with other strategies. And I think one of the important points to note is that the digital strategy and digital inclusion, digital connectivity affects every portfolio represented around this table, whether it be children and young people, rural, adults, public health, it affects everything. So that's the context and the background. The paper considers our current organisational response, and that can be categorised in 3 areas, so digital infrastructure, digital inclusion, and our systems leadership role. And then paragraph 34 provides a table in which it sets out our role and responsibility as proposed going forward. And I think the important thing to say about this is that there is a very distinct difference between our operational function in terms of our the work we do to remove barriers, to enable people to invest in a digital Hampshire, as represented by highways, or the planning process, and our systems leadership role. So our role as a strategic organisation and a strategic authority in terms of convening and collaborating with partners. The final section of the paper sets out the finances and resources, and we recognise that as this is a truly cross-functional piece of work, it really is something which is embedded in every directorate, but we do need to think about how we position that and drive that, so that temporary kind of drive that we need to move this programme of work forward. So that leads then to the recommendations within the paper.
Emma, thank you very much. And again, I know I keep repeating, but this was a huge piece of work, and especially from sort of where we were and where we were placed to what we're doing now and what we're proposing. So thank you for that. Any questions, Councillor Oppenheimer? Russell.
Thank you very much, Leader, and thanks, Emma, for the paper. You mentioned regional connectivity and wireless technologies at paragraph 27 of the report. Am I right in thinking that this is alluding to technologies such as 5G and satellite broadband? And so can you just explain a bit more about how these solutions might be part of reaching those hard-to-reach properties in Hampshire so that we get full rural connectivity eventually and get up to that 100% we've been chasing for so long?
Thank you, Councillor Oppenheimer. We know, we've heard that superfast connectivity and gigabit connectivity is really, really important. So we know that we have 97.8% of superfast connectivity in Hampshire. We have about 75% of gigabit connectivity, and the government's BDUK programme is aiming to deliver 85% coverage. However, from the numbers that have been shared with us, we anticipate there might be around 16,000 properties in Hampshire, excluding the New Forest, because we haven't had the numbers for the New Forest. And we're really keen to know what the solution is for our residents in those places. You're quite right that 5G, low Earth orbit satellites are likely to be part of the solution, particularly for premises in rural areas or things like the agri-tech industries, where 5G might provide faster and more reliable connectivity. There are probably 2 main things that local authority can do. So number 1, ensure that the commercial market can deliver in Hampshire, and that might be by unblocking some of the barriers that fall within our jurisdiction as a planning authority or a transport authority. But number 2, continue to lobby national government. And we as officers have been working closely, as you'd expect, with BDUK, the government agency, to seek confirmation from them about what their plans are going forward. I think there's a question, so we're doing that as an officer-to-officer interface. There's a question, I think, potentially for Cabinet about whether or not there's a political role there to play in terms of ensuring the government is aware of the need to support those residents that would otherwise be left behind.
Thanks, Emma. I agree with what you say. I think there is a role for us. You know, my feeling is that actually Hampshire County Council is very well regarded amongst these government bodies, Building Digital UK and the department, DCMS. I think we're also well regarded in the industry, actually, and I've spoken to quite a few senior Openreach people who enjoyed working with us when they had the contract with us. So I think those relationships will be important, and we can leverage them to advocate on behalf of our residents who do need to know what the solution for them is going to be. So that's really well said. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Any further questions from members? Otherwise, I have one. Emma, Gary mentioned the Economic Growth Board earlier, and we're all well aware of the importance in terms of digital technology, in terms of our growth as well. So it's just understanding that opportunity that arises through the Hampshire Growth Board with them and our partners as well. What are the opportunities in sort of setting up that? How can we achieve that through the Growth Board?
Thank you. It's quite nice how this meeting agenda has come full circle, isn't it, as an example of the role of that Economic Growth Board. So the paper describes a systems leadership approach. This is absolutely a complex problem, and it requires a multi-agency, multi-system approach. We need input from both the public but also the commercial sector. At present, there isn't a Hampshire-wide forum where all those issues can be brought together and be considered, and that can be taken forward to drive change. The Hampshire 2050 Partnership, as part of the Vision Summit in November, recognised that infrastructure, including digital, was one of their top priorities, so one of their top collective priorities for economic growth in Hampshire. And therefore, we would expect that new Economic Growth Board will want to consider infrastructure in its wider sense, but also digital as part of that when it comes forward. So we would expect that to be hopefully high on the list of priorities for that Growth Board.
That's great, Emma. Thanks very much. And it almost goes back to that point that Russell made earlier about the opportunities that are there. And as you say, gone full circle right round to partnership working and joining all those members up again. So yeah, so thank you for that. Thank you very much for presenting as well and the work you've done on that. Any further questions from members? No? Okay, I will then take us to the recommendations as set out on page 421 and 422. We all agree to accept those as set out? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the agenda. Just to thank all those that have presented, and to Joe as well for, as always, keeping me on the straight and narrow and preparing everything for me, Joe. Thank you very much. And we will bring the meeting to a close and ask for the webcast to be stopped, please. Thank you very much. And let us know when that has happened. Thank you.